want Big Daddy! We want Big Daddy!
Welcome to the Leading While Bleeding podcast with Robert A.
First, we gotta get in our dad joke for the week. What do you call, ladies, if you're listening? Give that man a hug. I know you feel the pain right now, but you gotta keep going.
Real and authentic growth each and every Monday.
I love you, Dad.
What's up, y'all, and welcome to the Leading While Bleeding podcast, a place where we really aim to turn pain into real progress in our daily lives for those eyes that are watching us each and every day. I'm your host, Robert A. Let's dive right in. Each week, we'll bring you hot topics that'll challenge your thinking and give you a new perspective, or at least give you something to incorporate into your day-to-day life for better living. And each week, you'll see me in one of my very many dad shirts that I've gotten for Christmas and birthdays and Father's Day and every other opportunity there is to give me a gift. I get a dad shirt, so you'll get to see them because where else am I going to wear them? So the purpose of this podcast and how it came about is something that I thought about for quite a long time, but I never really took action on it. And it wasn't until I lost my father a few weeks ago, my estranged father, who there's a lot of feelings around that, and we'll get into it. But it really put me in a place where I needed support, and I needed support in a way that most people couldn't understand because my father wasn't in my life. And I'm feeling tons of emotions, and then I'm feeling guilty about those emotions, and now I'm sad and I'm angry, and I started to spiral into a different direction. And this is me intentionally using that pain to create something purposeful, which is what I hope to inspire you all to do. So before we get into our topic today, which is about grief and grief in men, and particularly fathers that have to carry on and lead while they're sometimes bleeding, we have to first get in our dad joke of the week. So I'll give you the dad joke, and I will give the answer next week. You put your answers in the comments and see who can get it. Our first dad joke of the week is, why did the Scarecrow win an award? Now think about it. Why did the Scarecrow win an award? Drop your answers in the comments. We'll see who can get the closest, and we'll get our answer next week. So let's dive into the topic of grief and grief in men, particularly using this instance from my own life, as I said, why I started this podcast, of me having to make some tough decisions about a man that was not there for me when I needed him the most. And as you can imagine, it's created a lot of different emotions and a lot of different feelings in a time where I still need to be leading. My kids still need a snack. This one needs to go to practice. And all of my daily routines are still in place because I have to show up for people so often, and I don't often have the space to show up for myself. How do we deal with that? How do you keep going every day with the facade of being a strong man while you're bleeding? And to speak of a strong man, there's this research on a strong man archetype, and you can look it up and really do the research for yourself. But in order to be classified as a strong man, particularly within a family, one must be a king, a warrior, a magician, and a lover. The king is who provides for us, make sure everyone's happy and make sure everyone's needs are met. The warrior is the one that protects us, that fights for us, that shields us from the damages of the world. The magician, that's the one that you bring all of your problems to that you don't know how to solve. You fix this, fix that, and that person is expected to be able to come up with a result. And the lover, the one that's able to comfort you and guide you and give you correction and give you everything that you need emotionally to be able to be successful in life. But that man is bleeding. What is he to do? Naturally, he grieves. Just like any other human in the world, and Mythbusters, men grieve too. But how can a king express grief amongst his people? How can a warrior say, I'm hurt? How can a magician say, I can't figure out the answer to this? How can a lover say, I just need love right now because I don't have enough love for myself? That will break the archetype of a strong man, and us men can't bear the responsibility of feeling that. So we grieve in ways that our families may not sometimes understand, and we may not sometimes understand. And I'm going to break down a few types of grieving that have shown up in my life, have probably shown up in your life, and knowledge of it will help us be able to reshape how we grieve in order to be able to get better results from our lives. The first type of grief, which is probably the most common type of grief you've seen in someone grieving's life, which is called disenfranchised grief. And it's probably the most damaging of the types of grief that people experience in silence and in a way that most people can't interpret. And that's by way of abusing drugs, alcohol, having random sexual encounters, being at the clubs or the bars every night to kind of soothe something that's going on within. And disenfranchised grief is grief that's not socially acceptable behavior to grieve something emotionally. So it can be gambling, it can be any type of behavior that is condemned as a response to grief. And it's so tricky because it's the most common. And I mean, I just recall watching my mother, who eventually lost her life to drug overdose when I was 10 years old, but I watched her throughout my life struggle with this very thing. And I always knew that there was a different level of grief down inside of her that I just never had access to, and probably nobody else did. And that was the response that was rendered in her life as a result of her grief. And fast forward to over 20 years later, when my father passed and I was dealing with that grief, I started to grieve my mother again. And it was just very odd for me that two traumatic experiences that were over 20 years apart were now weighing on me every day. And it just taught me how grief doesn't discriminate against trauma that is unprocessed when things happen in our lives. And sometimes that's what leads to that socially unacceptable behavior in a lot of people when they go through things that when looking at the incident in isolation, it seems inappropriate. But there are things that some people are just carrying that are a lot deeper. And we're going to talk about some ways to help remedy that and help to be able to shift our thinking and our focus on how to grieve properly when we fall into these tough times. The second type of grief is instrumental grief. And that's grief where you stay busy so much that you distract yourself from the thoughts of whatever's going on in the present. That can look like the person that immediately starts to plan funeral arrangements when someone dies and has everything booked down to a T, to someone who may be a truck driver and did short routes and now takes that long road route just to be able to stay at work and disconnect and be able to distract themselves from their thoughts and their emotions. And that may be viewed as a more appropriate way to deal with grief than the disenfranchised ones that were mentioned, but it could have the same mental and emotional damage that a disenfranchised way of grieving would be, because the grief will still be there, and the next time a roadblock comes and grief or trauma strikes, that unsettled grief will rise to be able to be dealt with as well. And so just like I mentioned in the last instance where I ended up grieving my mother when I lost my father, even though those instances were 20 years or more apart, because of that unsettled grief was still there, it still struck me in a way that made the grief feel even greater than what it would be in isolation. And sometimes distracting yourself with work, and being able to just go may be productive, may build you in the physical realm, but it still is equitably destructive in the mental and emotional realm. And I want us to be mindful of that the next time a storm hits in our life. Then there's withdrawal. That's disappearing for days, eloping, not being present in any way, shape, or form in the moments where it's necessary and it matters in terms of the day-to-day life, right? And that doesn't even have to look like eloping the house. Sometimes there are men that come home and they're on a video game from the time that they get home to the time they go to sleep, and their families are wondering, why is a 13-year-old kid in Japan more engaging and get more level of intimacy from this man than they can in their own home? And it's a way of grieving. And because that man has no responsibility to that said 13-year-old kid in Japan, there's nothing that is going to arise that this man will have to respond to in this person's life. And so because of that, because he does not have to be king, warrior, magician, and lover to this said gaming person, he checks out. And it feels like withdrawal, but maybe with some knowledge we both can understand that withdrawal is the sense of grieving something. Though it's not being physically absent from the house, it's withdrawing from the family, and it's felt by the family, even though a person is using this way to grieve, and it's one of the more safer ways than the aforementioned. It's not experienced in that way. But I bring this one up in particular and all the other ones because I think understanding both perspectives in terms of the way someone grieves allows us to have a little bit more grace for one another and be able to heal and seek positive remedies to be able to progress forward in our lives. And then you have one of the hardest ways to grieve, which is through action-oriented grieving. Things like going to therapy, exercise, and I stress that because it is a distraction in a sense, in a way that drugs can be, in a way that all the other aforementioned ways of grieving can be. But it is replacing something for you mentally and emotionally as opposed to those other things. It doesn't replace anything in terms of helping you mentally and emotionally. So while you may be feeling down in the slumps, if you decide to get up and go for a run, I guarantee you within 1 minute of that run, your brain will start to think about breathing and regulating your lungs and being able to sustain yourself through that run, pacing yourself and not focus on the grief that you may have been feeling prior to doing that. And that is why that is an action-oriented way of grieving. The same way therapy sessions would be, the same way this is. This is a way of having action-oriented ways of grieving and being able to articulate my thoughts and my feelings and express myself in a way that's productive and may help you. So you are my therapy. You are my mental exercise and my community, my spectator, my support group. You are what is going to help me get through some of the things that I'm dealing with in conversation with this. So be sure to drop in the comments below some of the action-oriented ways that you deal with grieving or you recommend someone dealing with grieving, especially someone in a leadership position like us. And with that, each week we'll have topics that we can build on this foundation to be able to grow and be the leaders that we need to be and get the supports that we need for the wounds that we have while we're leading. We'll be talking to nutritionists, therapists, physicians, and regular everyday dads that have unique perspectives to share on this journey together. So be sure to tap in, like, and subscribe this page. And with that, we reach one of the last segments of our episode. As while we're catered to reaching men and fathers and leaders and future leaders, we also appreciate the love and the support of the women around us. So our last part of the segment is, ladies, if you're listening, that man is grieving something. There's some type of grief that comes with every leader because there's so much sacrifice that needs to be made in the position that there is always grief present. Sometimes it shows up in the ways that we've discussed. Sometimes it shows up in other ways. But be mindful of that man because he is grieving something. There is some sacrifice. It may not even be something major like a loss. It could be that relative that he had to cut off just to be able to raise the family that he is raising. It could be those friends that he used to hang with before he had any of these responsibilities that supported him. It could be a myriad of things, but that man is grieving something. Support him. And now for my challenge for the men. Since this episode is built around grief and is laying the foundation on healing that, my challenge is to you is to grieve, but don't self-destruct. Find action-oriented ways to put your energy into your grief and be able to heal yourself as you lead in this bleeding journey. Alright y'all, that's it for this week's episode. This episode was inspired by the Kendrick Lamar song United in Grief. Give it a listen and come back and listen to this podcast again and tell me what you think in the comments. Until next time, but first we'll have a word from our sponsors.
And don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe.
Peace, y'all. Good job, buddy.
Thank you.